Alina's phone buzzed one final time before she shoved it into her purse and forced a smile. She was already 15 minutes late for a date she did not want to go on, and her heart was pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with romance. 2 weeks ago, her fiancé had left her standing at a jewelry counter, choosing another woman over her without warning. Tonight, her friend Sophia had promised this blind date would help her move on. Alina did not believe it, but she had run out of excuses. She stepped into the restaurant, a place with soft gold lighting and quiet music, and spotted a man waving at her from a corner table. His name was Marcus, and he looked exactly like his photo, nervous and eager, standing halfway out of his chair to greet her. Alina sat down, ordered a glass of wine, and tried to focus on his story about his job at an insurance firm. Her mind kept drifting, though, toward the strange feeling that someone was watching her. It was right. Across the room, a man in a dark suit had gone completely still, his glass of scotch forgotten in his hand. Damiano had walked into his own restaurant to handle a business matter that no longer mattered to him, because the moment he saw Alina laughing politely at another man's joke, everything else disappeared. He remembered her from a charity event months earlier, remembered the sharp, fearless way she had turned down his invitation to dance without knowing who he was. Nobody refused him. She had, and he had never forgotten it. Marcus kept talking, unaware that his evening was already over. Alina excused herself to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe, and when she returned, everything had changed. Marcus was gone. In his place stood a tall stranger with dark eyes and an expression of complete calm, as if he owned not just the table but the entire room. "Where is he?" Alina asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "He remembered another appointment," Damiano said smoothly, pulling out the chair across from her. "I hope you don't mind company instead." Alina's temper flared. She recognized him now, the man from the gala, the one people had whispered about with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You can't just remove my date and sit down like this is normal," she said. "I can," he replied simply, "and I did." She should have walked away. Every instinct told her to gather her purse and leave this man and his unsettling confidence far behind. Instead, she found herself sitting back down, curiosity overpowering caution. There was something in the way he watched her, intense and unwavering, that made her pulse quicken despite her anger. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know you turned me down once," Damiano answered, leaning forward slightly. "I have been waiting for a reason to ask again." Alina opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Outside, rain had begun to fall against the windows, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she understood that her ordinary evening had just become something else entirely, something she could not yet name but could no longer ignore. Over the following week, Alina told herself she would forget about the man who had ruined, then rescued, her blind date. Instead, small signs of him kept appearing. A bouquet of white orchids arrived at her office with no card attached. A sleek black car waited outside her apartment some mornings, the driver offering a polite nod but never explaining himself. When she asked her doorman about it, he simply said the car had been arranged for her safety. Alina marched into the address the driver finally gave her, determined to demand answers. Damiano's office occupied the top floor of a glass tower, and when she stepped inside, he looked up from his desk as though he had been expecting her exactly at that moment. "You cannot send cars and flowers and pretend that is normal behavior," she said, arms crossed. "I disagree," he said, standing and rounding the desk. "I think it is exactly how a man should behave when something matters to him." "You don't even know me." "Then let me," he said quietly. "One dinner. My terms this time, since you clearly did not enjoy the last surprise." Alina wanted to refuse. Everything about him screamed danger, and Sophia had already warned her, wide-eyed, about rumors surrounding his family and the kind of business empire he controlled. Yet standing there, watching his composed expression crack just slightly with something like hope, Alina found herself nodding before she could stop herself. Their dinner took place on the rooftop of his building. City lights spread beneath them like scattered stars. Damiano was different here, less guarded, telling her about growing up surrounded by responsibility he never chose, about learning early that trust was a luxury he could rarely afford. Elena listened, surprised by the loneliness beneath his confidence. "I have never wanted to keep someone close before," he admitted, turning his glass slowly in his hand. "Not like this." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a warning and a temptation at once. "That sounds like a confession," she said softly. "It is," he replied, meeting her eyes without hesitation. "You make me want things I gave up expecting." She should have laughed it off, should have reminded him and herself that they came from entirely different worlds. Instead, she reached for her glass to steady her hands, aware of how easily his intensity was pulling her past every boundary she had set for herself only days earlier. When he walked her to her car that night, neither of them spoke, but the silence between them felt heavier than any words could have been, full of a promise neither was ready to name aloud yet. The peace did not last. Word reached Damiano that a rival family, the Marchettis, had noticed his growing attachment to Elena and viewed it as an opportunity. Within days, Elena vanished from her apartment during what should have been an ordinary evening, and Damiano received a message warning him to reconsider certain territory agreements if he wanted her found unharmed. He moved faster than his enemies expected. Calling in favors from every corner of the city, he tracked the signal from Elena's phone to an abandoned warehouse near the docks. His men surrounded the building within hours, and Damiano walked in personally, refusing to wait for anyone else to secure her safety. Elena sat tied to a chair in a dim room, frightened but resolutely calm, refusing to give her captors the satisfaction of seeing her break. When the door burst open and she saw Damiano's face, relief flooded through her so strongly her vision blurred. He crossed the room in seconds, cutting her free himself, his hands steady despite the fury barely contained behind his eyes. "I told you," he said quietly, helping her stand. "Nothing will happen to you while I am here." The ride back to the city passed in silence. Elena wrapped in his jacket, watching the streetlights blur past the window. She had seen tonight exactly what kind of power surrounded Damiano, the weight of loyalty and fear his name carried through the city. It frightened her, yet she could not deny that same power had brought him running to her without a moment's hesitation. Back at his penthouse, Damiano poured her a glass of water with hands that trembled slightly, the first sign of vulnerability she had seen from him since they met. "I should have protected you better," he said, sitting beside her. "You found me," Elena said. "That matters more." He turned to face her fully, his usual composure entirely gone. "I cannot promise you an easy life, Elena. I can only promise that I will never let anyone take you from me again." Elena studied him, the danger and devotion tangled together in his expression, and realized she was no longer certain she wanted to escape this world, only that she needed time to understand what staying would truly mean for her future. In the days following her rescue, Elena retreated to Sophia's apartment, needing distance to think clearly. Sophia watched her with worried eyes, gently reminding her of the ordinary life she had once wanted: quiet evenings, a steady job, safety without complication. Elena nodded along, but her thoughts kept returning to rooftop conversations and steady hands cutting rope from her wrists. Damiano did not call or send another car. He had promised, after everything, to let the decision belong entirely to her, and true to his word, he stayed away, though Elena later learned from his assistant that he had barely slept since the warehouse, spending his nights ensuring the Marchetti threat could never resurface again. A week later, Elena walked into his office unannounced, the same way she had weeks earlier when she demanded answers about flowers and cars. This time, she came with a different question entirely. "I have spent my whole life choosing safety," she said, standing in the doorway. "Every time I ended up disappointed anyway." Damiano rose slowly from his desk, uncertainty flickering across his usually unreadable face. And now I want to choose something that actually makes me feel alive, she said, stepping closer, even if it terrifies me. He crossed the room in 3 strides, cupping her face gently as though she were something precious he still could not quite believe was real. I claimed you the moment I saw you, he murmured, but I need you to claim me back completely with open eyes. I already have, Alina whispered and closed the distance between them herself, choosing him fully, fears and all. Months later, their world had settled into something neither had expected, a partnership built on honesty rather than secrecy, danger balanced carefully against devotion. Alina found her place beside him, not as someone he possessed, but as someone whose strength matched his own. Sophia, once skeptical, watched them together at a quiet dinner and finally admitted she had never seen Alina look so certain of anything. As the city lights glittered beyond their window that evening, Damiano took her hand across the table, no longer a jealous stranger claiming a stranger's date, but a man who had found in her someone worth every risk he had ever taken. And Alina, finally, someone who saw her exactly as she was and chose her anyway, completely and without hesitation.